Hi friends, so today I will be going over the finishing touches on my thief costume, which are the holsters for the daggers, aka I think they're called frogs, the scabbards, and I will also be giving a dollar store sword a little makeover, and then maybe we'll have time for bonus prop. The first thing that I did was sand down the lettering on the side of the sword with a 120 grit bit sanding band for my rotary tool. Why was that so hard to say? And then I sanded down the seam on top of the sword, around the edges, and on the handle, because like when these types of props are made in factories and stuff, they get like put together and there's a seam. You gotta sand that down because then it'll look more realistic, you know? I end up going over everything one more time with a 240 grit sanding band just to like further smoothen everything out. And then I use a little bit of sandpaper just to like get in between all the little grooves and stuff. For the smaller areas that I can't get into with my normal bit, I use a skinny diamond tip sanding bit thing. So yeah, I wasn't recording for some reason, but I hand painted a coat of gray over the whole thing except for the handle, and then airbrush very dark brown, almost black paint onto the blade and the wrist guard. Next, I highlight the edges of the blade with a brown metallic paint that I've been using for this entire thief build. I'm using a skinny brush and just hitting the edges with it. I also scuff up the hand guard with it. I painted the handle brown and I used that same brown to dry brush some dirt onto it, and then, or what looks like dirt, just to make it look used and old. For the scabbard or sheath, I'm pretty sure it's a scabbard because I think that scabbards, like the definition is a sheath for a blade, so I think that's right. I traced around the sword and I added a little bit of allowance around it for it to easily slide into, but ignore this first one because I actually really did not make it big enough. So as you can see here, I am struggling and the sword has a weak point. So back to patterning, I made it quite a bit bigger. So I put it onto 6mm foam, cut it out, and glued it together, and I tested it and it fits. Wow, yay. Now I am sanding the edges of it. Now I'm sanding the edges of it to round it out a little bit and get rid of that ugly seam. I am using the Foamery high density 6mm foam and it sands beautifully. I'm using my 120 grit sanding band at first to get the shape right and to also get rid of all the hot glue pieces. And then I went back in with the 240 to smoothen everything out and get rid of all that rough texture. Then I think I'm using 220 sandpaper for just a little bit of hand sanding. Next, I used my heat gun to melt off any sanding stragglers that may have survived. Then I seal the edges with quick seal. So on my pattern, I draw on some little details that I'll apply later with some 2mm foam. I just want the scabbard to look a little bit spicy and not like a boring flat container. I cut out the patterns that I made, put them on a 2mm foam, cut them out, and then I glued them on. So I ran out of Plasti Dip, but I had so much stuff to work on that I didn't feel like going out to get any, so I just started airbrushing the scabbard. I used a dark brown for the base. The paint survived pretty well at the Ren Fair. I also didn't clear coat it, so this is just paint right on foam. I always recommend priming and sealing if you can. Once the base is on, I hand paint around the raised edging I made with black and I smudge it to make it look all dirty and worn. Next, I use that metallic brown to highlight and scuff up any edges. Then I go in with black paint on the handle and bring out that grip detailing. Next, I need a way to attach my daggers to my belt, so I make holsters, or again, I think they're called frogs. So I start with this square design and I kind of curve the bottom inwards and then there's like a flat bottom, like if that makes sense. And then I realized it is a tad small, so I make it bigger. I put the dagger against the frog to see if it's big enough, and it is, and it should hold it really well. Next, I put the pattern on a 2mm foam and I cut it out. I then cut the same pattern out of the leather that I've been using for this whole build, which is a 50-cent thrifted jacket. It was very exciting. It was a wonderful find. I still have so much of this jacket left over. And I made the pattern a little bit bigger to make up for a seam allowance so that I can wrap the fabric around the foam and sew it to the foam. I use little clips to hold the fabric onto the foam. I have some thick straps from another thrifted leather jacket that work really perfectly for making the straps on this, so those will hold the weapon. So I sew down the edging of those for a nice clean edge, and I will later put in eyelets on that edge there. Then I just sew the leather to the foam. Next, I test the fit of the strap as well as the angles, since I like to have my weapon angled instead of straight up and down. So a little experimenting got me the perfect angle, and I just sewed the strap down to the base. Next, I mark where I want to punch 4 holes onto each side of the strap. I'll be using eyelets to tie the weapon into place. So I use a ruler to get a perfect spacing, punch out the holes, and then insert the eyelets and clamp them down. Next, I tie the dagger into place and it fits. I'm really happy with the way that these came out. I do end up going back in later and folding down some like extra that was on the base. There's a lot of extra fabric that wasn't actually doing anything. It wasn't holding the weapon in place or anything, so I just sew it down. Next, I figure out how to strap it to my belt. So I use a spare strap sitting around and I install a button on one side. This will go around the belt and it will button to itself on the back of the base, and that's really it. I did make 2 of them because I wanted to have like a dual wielding thief. I think it came out pretty cool. I like the angle of it, and overall I like how it came out. For some reason, I lost the footage of the other weapon that I have there, so I made that weapon like January and I made a scabbard for it, but it's like a soft scabbard. It's out of leather fabric, so like it just doesn't look good, so you don't need to see that. All right guys, we do have time for bonus prop. So I really wanted a small boot / dagger knife so that if for some reason I lost both of my like daggers, I could like pull out this rainbow one and then all my enemies will be like, oh, she has the rainbow dagger. And yeah, that came out way more lame than I thought it was going to be. So I am using the 6mm high density EVA foam. Thank you so much, Jim, for getting that for me for my birthday. Oh my goodness, thank you. So because I'm using the 6mm high density EVA foam, I don't need much in the way of internal support, since this will be a pretty small prop. It should do fine on its own, holding its own weight. But I am using a little bit of ABS plastic as a skeleton just in case it does get weak in like the handle. First, let me flatten out my foam and place the pattern on and cut it out. Do remember to change your blades often. I'm doing an angled cut for the blade so that I don't have to do much sanding onto it, so that the knife comes down to a nice point. So I just make sure that my blade is sharp enough to cut at an angle and get a nice clean cut. I slowly turn my blade at an angle once I get to the blade of the dagger, and just to give it a nice sharp edge. Going back to the ABS plastic, I use my rotary tool and a cutter bit to cut the skeleton out for the dagger. Then I put it on the dagger to make sure it'll fit, and it does. So I just start gluing the 2 pieces together. I didn't even glue down the skeleton first. I'm like, I'm just gonna plop these 2 sides together. But normally, yes, glue down the supporting structure. I didn't have to carve a channel for it just because the ABS plastic was so thin that it didn't cause the foam to gap or anything like that, so it was fine. Once the 2 pieces were glued together, I take my 120 sanding bit, sand everything down to get the right angles, and then I go back in with my 240 bit and I smoothen out the blade. I'm not sure why my dust mask and glasses combo here looks super funny, but I laughed far too hard when I was putting the video together. I don't know, it just looks really funny. Anyway, safety is important. For the tiny sections where the pommel meets the handle, I use the skinny bit to stand out any weirdness that could be going on. After creating some battle damage with that same skinny bit, I heat up the foam to melt any straggly bits and open up the battle damage cuts that I made. I tried putting in some detail with some crumpled up foil, but I kind of wish I just kept it smooth. It's not really that big of a deal, it's just not too noticeable and just, I don't know, it looks weird. So I'm cutting thin pieces of foam here to create swirly decorations, but I ended up really not liking it, so it's only on one side of the blade, and that's the side that won't be facing out when I put it in my boot. I'm not really sure what I was going for, I was just experimenting. You can also see here that I sealed the seams on the top where the two pieces of foam are glued together with some quick seal. Next, I airbrushed the whole thing white. I'm using a wire around the pommel to hold it so that my fingers aren't in the way. Next, the whole thing gets a coat of this beautiful blue paint. I do 2 full coats of this. Then I use pink along the edge of the blade. I do a few coats to make it really pop and nice and vibrant, make sure there's no blue coming through. Hard to see here, but I am going over a bit of the pink with some orange. Again, I do that a few times. And then in between the pink and the blue, I do a little bit of purple. The top of the blade gets coated in a very green highlighter color, and then I realized that was way too bright. I was like, nope. So I added a bit of blue to it, and it does look a lot better now. Next, I use yellow at the very bottom of the blade, and I also use it to highlight the top of it as well as highlight the tip. And that's really it for airbrushing. It took a lot longer than I thought it was going to because just the drying time took forever. Next, I go along the edges with a silver metallic paint. I was really getting lost in this build. I was dealing with a lot of stuff in my personal life, but it was really nice just to disappear in my mind for a while and just create something bright and fun. Next, I wrapped the handle a few times and just experimented with different wraps. I didn't want any boring wraps as that's what I normally do. So how about some fun X's? This was pretty fun. I liked it a lot. I loved the way that the colors came out. It was really good airbrushing practice. Definitely a step up from the last rainbow blade that I made. So I do go over everything with a clear shiny coat just to keep the paint from chipping in my boot. Although honestly, it's still chipped. I didn't prime it. It was rubbing against straps constantly. And that's it. This costume was so much fun to make. I felt really cool in it. And I got to try out a lot of really awesome new things like making a sheath / scabbard. That was really fun. So thank you so much for watching. Check out my Patreon if you would like to support more fun builds. And thank you so much to my patrons Adam Hunt, Aliar, Anime Crush, Blue Panda, Brian, David Rosenbaum, Eric, Jenny Lynn, Jim W, Jordy the Trekkie, Kalika Kaiser, Logan Don Carlos, Malus Murden, Mark, Nathan M, Ninja Ruki, Nanaman, Rob Thompson, Robert Gallardo, Rusty Shackelford, Sakura, and Veldemir. Thank you guys so much. Have a super awesome rest of the day, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!